Dr. Banjimani and Gabrielle as well, and then also from Fern, which is great. And they have some updates for us, and then also take questions, and we can have a conversation about lots of questions that are on our minds. So without further ado, I introduce to you Matthew Lowe. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Hi, good morning everybody. Good morning. This is good, people can hear me. Cool. Alright. So, cool, thank you. Alright. So, here's the thing about being approached by a student crisis. It's never just about the crisis. It's always the fact that the crisis is interfering with their business with you. Right, so there's always kind of this 1-2 punch, right? Here's what's going on with me, here's how it affects my business with you. I don't know if this is generally what it looks like to you, but I'm just trying to guess based on what it looks like in the counseling center. So what that means is that when a student approaches you in distress, whether by email or in person, helping them actually ends up involving 3 different tasks that need to be juggled, right? There's addressing the actual business at hand, right? They ask you usually some sort of logistical question or request. There's also the part where they're having a bunch of emotions kind of at you, and some kind of acknowledgement of that is usually helpful, right? Just for the sake of taking care of the student in that regard. And you would think that's kind of all there is, right? Is these 2 things. But there's this hidden task, and if we don't attend to it, then it's really hard to be supportive. And it's managing your own emotions while being responsive to what they said. Out in the non-therapy world, this is sometimes called emotional labor. You're familiar with emotional labor, perhaps because people who are wait staff at restaurants or on airlines, how their day is going isn't what's important because you're the customer, right? As a therapist, right, how my day is going does not matter to the student and should not, because we have a one-way relationship of I'm there to take care of them. In therapy, we call this managing countertransference, where they approach you and you have a lot of thoughts and feelings and gut responses to what they are saying, and managing that so that it does not get in the way of those first 2 tasks is important to acknowledge, and that's part of what I'm going to be focusing on today. I see really number 3 as the value-added part of my session, especially in the pandemic. Helpers always have to manage countertransference, but as a therapist, this pandemic has been more or less like countertransference boot camp. So, right. That's all. That's fantastic. I want this to be interactive, so I'm just going to check to see if people's responses are able here. You don't have to say any words, but I'll ask for various kinds of grunts. So a supportive grunt is like, ah, right? A rejecting grunt is like, ah. And then if you really are indifferent to what I say, how would you do a rejecting grunt?
Thumbs up, thumbs down?
No, I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Thank you. And I guess an indifferent grunt is, eh. So, I'm going to share a personal opinion, and I want each person at once to just give me their response. I've read all 7 Harry Potter books. I think they're overrated. Okay, excellent. All I was asking for was that you all could show me that you're listening and feeling and able to respond. Great. That being said, I didn't update this. See number 2 where it says 10 once, make that 15. 15? Is that what we're up to here? Who's keeping count? Thank you. What kind of things are students contacting you about, say, in the last 15 months? And I used to be a teacher, I'll take hands. Yes, sir.
Death in the family.
Deaths in the family. Okay, thank you. What else? Yes?
Too much homework.
Too much homework.
Too much Facebook.
Yep, sure, thank you. Yes?
Financial
What kind of stress?
Finance.
Financial stress. Financial stress, feeling overworked with school, deaths in the family, other things? Yes?
Homelessness.
What's that?
Homelessness.
Homelessness, thank you. Yeah.
Need to take care of sick family members.
Need to take care of family members, sure.
Quarantine stress.
Quarantining stress, yeah, absolutely. This sounds about right, especially because these are the kinds of things that I've been hearing as well. And when this happens, whether by email or in person, I'm guessing that it sets off one or more emotional responses in you, right? And so when you get contacted, how might you feel when approached by a student? And if you're not that comfortable, like this is, I want to be very clear, while I'm a therapist, this is not group therapy, so like treat this as you want to. We actually, I was discussing this with our new director today, we do not offer counseling to staff members here. She wanted to make sure that that was the case, and that is indeed the case, sorry about that. So if you're not that comfortable with emotion words, you can tell me the kinds of thoughts that you have. If a student contacts you in this way, what are the kinds of thoughts that happen internally? What's that? Helplessness. Okay. Feeling helpless about their situation in some ways. Sure? Yes?
Yeah, you can empathize with students.
Sure. Like feeling for
Where
them?
they're coming from, it's generally not just unique to that student.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Helpless, empathic, empathetic. What else?
Frustration.
Yeah, frustration. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
Reminds me of myself being an undergraduate.
What does it remind you of?
Of being an undergraduate.
I see. So it brings you back to sort of your own time at that age. Absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'm starting with this point because I think it's going to be primary, that no matter how professional and proper you want to be, how you feel about being approached will shape your response. So now that we've touched on your experience, we can back up and consider the student experience. Actually, here's a bit of an overview of what I hope to cover. I hope if no one minds if I go through this part relatively quickly. The thing about a pandemic is it's everywhere. So I know I'm talking to people who have also been going through it. We could easily have a big old group therapy session, which we all share what we know personally and anecdotally, but we're not going to do that. So instead, just a quick survey. First, just my own anecdotal data as a person, as a therapist. Here are the various things that people are worried about and thinking and feeling. I think I made this back in January. Probably the word tired is something that I would add on there now. Not that people weren't feeling it before, but it certainly is the word that comes up more often now, at least among the adults that I'm talking to. I'm hoping that you are not experiencing all of these things right now, but probably you've experienced some of them, and I'm sure that you're aware that these are the issues. Beyond the pandemic, there's also been a lot going on simply in the news, and so that also can be on people's minds and weighing on them. Some of the things that people have been seeing is increased suicidality. That doesn't necessarily mean attempts, but it can just mean thoughts about suicide. What we're seeing a lot of is people who had previous diagnoses or previous mental health issues are having those exacerbated. And for some people who previously were not having issues, but they're having them now, right? Different people have different levels of stress that they can cope with. And once you go over a certain line for some people, that is then going to be where they start having symptoms. And we're probably going to be seeing this for a while, since the increased stress over all this time is going to have some lingering effects. There we go. I think I covered this. This is, for anybody in the know here, this is the diathesis stress model of pathology. Diathesis is the bottom of the cup, represents a person's pre-existing vulnerability and tendency towards pathology. So even in a time of low stress, highly vulnerable people may not be symptomatic, but if you add enough stress, some people's cups are going to run over before others do. For myself, right, I'm generally a pretty stable person, but the beginning of this pandemic was enough to send me over the top for a bit. We can also appreciate that it's not all bad. I've had clients at the school who handled this really well, even better than I did. Some people find crises really clarifying. I had clients who came at the beginning of last year telling me that they had dropped a bunch of friends that they realized were not, part of a good support network for them. Other people who realized that they were able to step up for themselves in ways that they couldn't before. So it's been really impressive that they can do this. And other scholars in the field are also noting that people can respond to crises with things like gratitude for what they have and what we call post-traumatic growth, where their world gets rocked and they put things back together and can become stronger for it. So, now that I've dipped into this topic a little bit, I want you to check in with yourselves here about how you feel about this. You might notice just what your sort of mental, response is. You can also notice physical responses, right? For me, sometimes if a topic sits on me a certain way, I feel it right here, or like right here. You can also notice if it's affecting, are your shoulders like this? Are you back? Are you relaxed? Where's your breath? Are you aware of it? Is this topic okay to focus on, or is it hard to focus on? So again, I'm not going to make anybody share, but it's important for you to be checking in this way, because these are the things that you're dealing with anytime somebody comes to you looking for help. So let's talk about ways that people are coping and communicating around stress. So there's 3 kinds of maladaptive coping: avoidance, surrender, and overcompensation. Avoidance of stress these days can look like compulsive numbing, whether through drugs, media, actual dissociative episodes. Purely somatic symptoms can be a sign of avoidance, right? So often, sometimes, they don't have the bandwidth, right, to be mentally processing anything. So instead, their body might just take the burden of it. Often, I don't think I'm very stressed, but my stomach tells me otherwise. Surrendering to stress looks like feeling it, right? Depression, panic, rumination. Overcompensation is often mistaken for positive coping because it comes off as hyper-performance, right? The person who insists on positivity and insists on productivity, right? These things are great, but the overcompensator runs a high risk of burnout. Something I think that should be appreciated as well is that adaptive coping still can look like healthy versions of these things, right? Like, taking breaks is good, and taking breaks, I guess, is a kind of avoidance, but obviously it's one that is measured, right, rather than done in a compulsive way, right? Being flooded by feelings is obviously a problem, but giving yourself the chance to feel them, right, and have an emotional response, we call that processing. That sounds really good. And similarly, people who are trying to maintain functioning through a crisis, they don't have to be overcompensating, they can just be staying engaged in life, right? So doing these things in a balanced way is what's really the challenge. Something else that I've noticed too, is, again, because this isn't therapy, I won't ask anybody to share personally, but you might recognize yourself as like, yes, I tend towards one of these more than the other. For a long time, I would be like almost judgmental about which one people chose, because I was like, oh, well, I do this one. That one really works for me. I can't believe people would do otherwise. And it took me a while to realize I had not chosen my maladaptive coping. Like, I had a kind of personality and whatever it was, like survival skills, and they ended up going this route. But like, people don't seem to choose how they manage things poorly if they're going to manage it poorly. So let's consider what these look like in terms of communication. So you'll probably know this better than I do. Here's the easy one. How do avoiders communicate? You can call out.
They don't.
Yeah, they don't. They won't approach you. So this is really challenging because that means that their absence is the sign. So that's hard. How do overcompensators communicate? An overcompensator is contacting you. What's that going to sound like?
Keep asking, keep emailing.
Interesting, right? So they're like so on top. They're in touch for help, but it's because they're trying to be as on top of it as possible. Thank you. Do you want to? Similar, yeah, absolutely. And the overcompensator also, maybe I think this is more in the realm of talking about stress, is going to be unwilling to give anyone else a break. Right? If other people are feeling it, the overcompensator is going to have very little tolerance for somebody who's actually experiencing the stress because they're very invested in not experiencing the stress. And surrenderers, right, they're going to communicate, with whatever they're feeling. So they might contact you panicky, angry, depressed, despairing, helpless, suicidal, things like that. There you go. Avoidant, overcompensating. Okay. Now, as for us, right, we have the challenge of responding. And so there are a few parts of this that I want to go over. One is about resistance, one is about countertransference, and a little bit about how to respond. So this is the part where we talk about resistance. And the resistance specifically to playing a supportive role for students in distress. So since I'm not a professor, I want to be clear that what I'm about to say is me speaking for myself. Basically, if I were you, and I was once a teacher, but I was not a high school teacher, either way, if I were you, I would be super annoyed by the task of supporting a student in any way besides teaching the subject that I came here to teach. That's me. Before becoming a therapist, I was a teacher for some years, and what drew me to the work was love of the subject and not of the students. So it's very possible that this attitude got in the way of me being a better teacher, but that's what it was. I mean, I was there for my topic. So it turns out, though, that this attitude I had is what 20th century existential philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith. Right? Bad faith is about denying some aspect of existence, and doing so in order to reduce the tension of that distressing aspect of existence. Right? If I can be just a teacher, that is so much easier. I can make my life really simple when I can say, look, I'm just a teacher. Right? I sort of reduce my potential, denying my freedom, right, to do more, and doing that made things easier. Looks like I had that in there. So the fact is that, unfortunately, we don't get to be simple functions. We don't get to be just teachers because you, are in this position to do more. What they talk about is being on the front lines of college mental health. You're the adult who sees the students more regularly than anybody else. And more than that, the professor is in this position to have a unique impact on each student, on their sense of self-worth, their value, their growth. For what it's worth, it's okay to be annoyed by this, but it's also an important challenge to rise to. So rising to this challenge, we have to start managing our own emotional responses. The term is called countertransference. It's not terribly well formed. It's just supposed to be the opposite of transference. Lord. Transference refers to feelings that the client transfers onto the therapist, even though really it comes from somewhere else in their life. So if I remind somebody of like someone they dated and then like they start treating me that way, that's transference. Countertransference is sort of the opposite of that, when the feelings from the therapist's life gets drawn into the therapy session. Right, so let's say I've gone through a bad breakup at some point in my life. The thoughts and feelings and images of that breakup are going to be maybe stirred up and come to mind if a client brings up that topic. If they're going through a breakup, my own experience is now going to be front and center. And if I'm experiencing too much countertransference with the clients, I might respond to them in a way that's really managing my own needs rather than theirs. So here's what the ideal therapy session looks like, except for the couch part, that's really outdated. Right, this would be really good. They're sharing what's going on. I'm here wondering and feeling and focusing. Here's what it looks like when we factor in countertransference. You see how this complicates things, right? This is why it's so important that we take ourselves and our emotions seriously, because whether they see us as this or not, we are full people. Right? We have our own feelings, and those have to be honored and addressed when someone else needs our attention and care. This is why it's so important to understand your own coping style. You don't need to answer allowed, but take a moment and consider what situations in the last year and a half have brought any of these styles out in you. And more than that, what are the ways that you tend to feel when a student contacts you? And I hope you can tell them that the coping style of the teacher, of the person helping, might get in the way of giving an open and appropriate response to a student. So, tell you what, we'll reverse this now, right? If there's a teacher who is an avoider, what are the ways they might respond to the student? Simply ignore. When we say ignoring the problem, what do you mean exactly?
Ignoring the problems the student addresses.
I see. So the avoider might actually write back an email, but in doing so, do this like just very business kind of way. Yeah, absolutely. The avoider, of course, I mean, I guess this is far less professional, might not respond at all. And that is a thing that can happen. You don't need to like act yourselves, but it can happen. Right? An avoider might not respond at all, or they'll respond being like just business. Yep. How will the surrenderer, right, the surrenderer to what's happening inside of them, how will they respond to the student? Yes?
Just say yes to whatever the student asks.
Okay.
Yes, you're excused, yes, you can pass, yes.
They'll just feel sort of overwhelmed, and then the yes is almost like, the sooner I say yes, the sooner I'm not dealing with this anymore, that kind of thing, absolutely.
They will only speak to students' emotions and not really any solutions and resolution or some.
That's fascinating. Right, that they might be feeling so much empathy that they take on the role of like, oh, I need to tend to this person and be their therapist now, and sort of lose the business part of it altogether. Wow, thank you for that. Yep. I think other things that can happen as well is if they're feeling overwhelmed by their own emotions, getting the student, contact might also be overwhelming as well, leading to some kind of breakdown or lashing out, right? I'm going through so much, and this person emails me, and I got one more thing, I don't need this, right? So that can happen as well. The person who deals with stress, oh yes, please.
It's very hard to make a balance how to be professional and how to be sympathetic.
It is.
And also, being too much sympathetic is dependence.
Yep.
So rather than getting 1 or 2 or 3, again, constantly, the email is from 2 o'clock in the morning. It's very hard.
Yeah.
These things that you're mentioning is profound, and I really appreciate it. It's very useful.
Yeah, thank
But
you.
then still I'm struggling.
Yes.
How to make a balance?
We're definitely building up to that.
Can I be professional in some kind of system?
Sure, absolutely. I think there's even a kind of efficiency that we want, right? To be responsive in a way that then doesn't turn into therapy by email, right? So I'm definitely building, right now I'm sort of doing a lot of the back, and I'm building up to a lot more concrete suggestions as well, because I think you're absolutely right that it's hard to do this with the kind of balance that's needed. Somebody who deals with stress through overcompensation is going to likely dismiss the student's concerns and probably encourage overcompensation themselves. Right? That's how I get by. I'm going to tell you to get by the same way. Okay. So, thus the need for emotional labor. You can only help the other person with their emotions if you have already handled your own, or know how to set aside your own for the time being. I would encourage you at this point, you can take some personal notes if you want, or just in your head. I also am happy to share this with you later. Emotions. Okay. It's good to know sort of your triggers. That could mean like environmental and things that are going on around you that might get you in a certain state. But it can also mean if there are certain kinds of students that especially bug you. Right, to really know, like, which are the, and that could be a personality thing or a typology thing, right? So, go before, right, the different here, right? Which of these students is the one that is like a real burden when they contact you? To be aware of that, because when that one contacts you, that's when you're like, oh, I need to be looking at myself first and knowing what's happening rather than simply letting them know, that I do not care for how they do business. Recognizing how their coping style invokes yours. being aware often of the fact that you're stressed or that you're annoyed or whatever the feeling is, or overwhelmed. And do various kinds of physical de-escalation. Some people use breathing. Some people will just sort of adjust their posture, and that can help. I personally, if people have seen me around here, will take a lot of walks in between sessions, and that's my way of sort of de-escalating and like letting out a little bit of energy. Hopefully this is something that you know for yourself. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Also recognizing that this is a hard one here, that my response to them is not, oh, they're the problem, right? Why are they being like this, right? They're being the students. The way I'm responding is my issue. And to really be able to own that, which is really, I hope it's very clear, all this is really easier said than done, right? It really takes a lot of work on oneself to be able to do emotional labor at all, right? For folks in this room who do emotional labor for their partners, or if they have children, do emotional labor for their children, right? The kind of like being the bigger person thing is a drag, and it's also the role that we find ourselves in when we're in the role of doing emotional labor. This looks like a reading. Oh, I see. A few other things is recognizing, right, if it's getting overwhelming, to be able to name to yourself, oh, there's something about this that bugs me, this needs to be addressed. And also, sort of being nice to yourself afterwards, right? Reducing secondary trauma means if there's some student and your interactions are really getting on you, to manage that, right? And to do something about it, whether that means talking about it, venting about it, or even just finding a way to let go of it a bit. I used to work in addiction services up in Boston at a men's homeless shelter. So I would hear really intense stories about what people have been through. And I was their therapist. I would see them, you know, like day after day. They lived at this place. And I had a practice that I would sometimes do. I would make sure the client was very far away from the room when I did this, which is after he would leave to myself, I would kind of do this shrugging it off. I go like, oh, whew, good luck to that guy, right? And it was just that thing of like, he's no longer in the room, and so right now, his problem does not have to be my problem. And that, and, you know, if I did it in front of him, that would be incredibly callous. But for me to be able to go home and have my life not be work, that kind of like, measured, whatever you want to call it, right? This sort of using compassion when it's needed and using callousness to protect myself, you know, in a responsible and loving kind of way, is really helpful. All right, let's get into the specifics about how to respond. I also realize I'm not at all following. How am I on time here? All right, cool. Okay, a little bit about responding. Again, all of this will be available digitally if you'd like. First, of course, when a student contacts you, you're going to have reactions, so your first response is simply managing the reaction. Now, once you've collected yourself, now you can address the student. So, first, a little bit about expressing compassion. Fun fact, you don't have to feel empathy to empathize. People often just need someone to witness and reflect their emotion back to them. Right? That can be as simple as, that sounds hard, or I hear you're feeling really whatever the thing is. It's strange, and again, I don't know how to feel about this as a person who is a therapist, but I know that I will do that with clients, where I'm responding to them, you know, intellectually I'm listening, and I'm listening for emotion words, right? I'm listening for feeling, and I'm able to say, oh, that sounds hard, it sounds like it's really X. Whether you actually care or not, people feel cared for if you name their emotions back to them. So fun trick there, how to do all of these things without actually weighing too much on your heart. I guess what I'm talking about is a kind of empathy that's a little less leading to burnout in some ways. You can, of course, check for safety, right? That's gonna, you know, to be clear, by the way, this step is not always necessary. I want to include it so that you know that it can be a good step. If you're worried about their safety, ask the question, right? And usually it's not, are you thinking of hurting yourself or killing yourself? You can really just say, do you feel safe? And usually that's, I mean, if you want to get explicit, you can get explicit, but do you feel safe or are you safe right now is worth asking. You can ask these questions. You can get a little more into it. I think I'm just sharing this so that you know how I tend to do it. Somebody who's having suicidal thoughts does not mean that they are suicidal, and it does not mean they need to go to the emergency room. We have this great term called passive ideation, where somebody is having a thought, and it's because they feel trapped, and they don't want to be trapped, but they also do not want to kill themselves. Right? So if they have thoughts like that, you can ask the follow-up questions if you want, like, how do you feel about these thoughts? You can also send them along to us. Right? If you want to check for the severity of safety concerns, here's some things you can ask. But if you're worried about their safety, this is also a fine time to contact the counseling center. Counseling at Mount St. Vincent. A little bit more about how to respond. You can tell them, what you're able to do and what you can't. What I really like about this empathy thing is you can actually be very strict with policy while empathizing, right? Try not to use the word but. Don't say, hey, I really feel for you, but, because they're going to see that and it sort of hurts them a lot. You can really just put them side by side. I see that you're going through a lot. Here's what the policy currently is. And you can really respond in a way that is maybe prioritizing their mental health. Right? If you're able to say, like, I can see this is hard, you're sharing their priority of mental health while not saying, I'm going to solve your mental health problem by changing my rules for you. That's a complicated piece. Something else that you can do is you can be a bridge to resources. Right? That means like, hey, I want to be helpful for you, but there are also other people on campus that can be useful. Right? The idea of referring without abandoning, right? That's this kind of thing where they have to feel like somehow you have never told them this is my problem. Even though in some ways, because you're referring, you are telling them something like that. So you're able to say, hey, I hear you, I want to be supportive, also here's this resource. Services are free and confidential. There we go. Didn't really know I was on this yet. Thank you. Probably on that. You can also ask them who else in their lives they talk to. You can say, are you talking to other people about this? That can be really tricky. I know there are students in this school who do not feel connected to their families. And if they're freshmen, they may not feel connected to their friends here. It's still good to ask the question, just because if they do have anybody, it'll jog that, like they will think like, oh yes, I could turn to them, and that's good. If they say no, like that's sad, but it was already sad, they were going to be sad about it anyhow, and you're already helping connect them to counseling. Right. Here's what I can do for you, here's what I can. A little bit more about referring. What you might be listening for is a certain intensity of distress, and we use the word disruption. Probably the word dysfunction is the word to use, which is if they're reaching a certain level of dysfunction, that would be a good time to refer to us. You can also consult with us. That's really common here. A lot of teachers will email counseling at Mount St. Vincent and just be like, here's the deal, here's what the student said, like what do you think? That's legit. We are very, just like services are free, all consultations are free as well. When you are, thank you, encouraging the student to go, you can tell them that's free and confidential, that we're here to help with the distress. Most people who come to counseling at this school are just feeling stressed. Like, people think, oh, it's for sick people. Yes, like inpatient is for sick people. Counseling here is just for people who care about their success. That's pretty much how I sell it, and people show up because of that. Of course, if you think there is a serious crisis going on, you can contact the counseling office, admin on duty, security, etc. Some things not to do, and move a little faster. I'm not a psychic, so I can never tell people it's going to be okay. If you can actually have power over something, then you can tell them it's going to be okay because you have that power, but otherwise, don't reassure them. Try not to lecture. Usually what I might do is go and lecture somebody else. I'll say like, hey, here's what I really want to tell the students, and I know I can't. That can be useful. Try to minimize, trying to save them from their anxiety. A little bit about this year. Based on what we saw last spring, a lot of the things that you all mentioned were coming up. Sick family members, more financial stress, more issues related to feeling isolated. However, at the same time, again, students have been stepping up. A lot of students realize, like, oh, because we're physically distant, they started setting up routine, meetings with friends or with family through screens. And a lot of students, an intern told me about a student who picked up painting again because she needed an outlet, that was different than anything else that she was up to. People are really active. A little bit about this fall, right? We're continuing to allow this to continue. Students are going to feel this tension between returning to normal and maintaining safety. A lot are going to feel burned out because of the Delta variant. There's this phenomenon of thinking the pandemic is over or was over and now it isn't. And even if it were over, there would still be these lingering effects and after effects. It'll be especially important for faculty to recognize that students may be dealing with this even without a specific cry for help. The student who always appears distracted. The student who doesn't show up. And you can reach out to check in with them, right? Not to discipline, but just to let them know that you're there and that the school can offer resources. Besides that, you can take care of yourself. You're also going through this. And most of all, you can be humane in your relationships with students. You can lead with empathy and compassion and prioritize well-being in your communications, right, rather than being all business. Please try not to assume that their issue can be helped simply through better study habits. And something that I learned to do, because I can have this with students as well, I started rereading my email before sending them, or I would write the email and then close it and open it again like in 20 minutes. And try to think like, okay, how would I feel if I received this email? I did some really good editing in the last 6 months or so to some students, where my initial response, it was legitimate, but it was not for them. And so I gave myself the chance to have that, and then be like, okay, but what am I going to do with my public-facing self? Obviously, this is a lot. What this is, and Dr. Pipitone has been emailing me about this, is that I believe that she is inviting people to include a kind of mental health statement on syllabi this year. We created a draft of one. Here's what it is. I think that she'll probably make it available to you. I think that's it. Questions? Time? Good? You're good? Great.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for conversations, like questions for Matthew.
Yes.
I'd just like to address this question to everybody in the room here, who obviously are employed as professors here, who had probably a pretty good history of having teachers who in the past, undergraduate or graduate, helped them enormously. And I know that as an educator, I rely strongly on the qualities that you enumerate here that was sort of taken for granted for some of my instructors back at also very difficult times in the late 60s and early 70s, when the country was also going through a catharsis and crisis. I can't think of any time when it wasn't actually, but not with the pandemic. But I think that I borrow as a resource for my teaching the best of my teachers in college, particularly undergraduate. And a lot of what you're saying is kind of a natural way of being a good communicator by not distancing yourself, but really seeing yourself as equal and a bottom-up sort of approach or a top-down approach, looking at students as being sort of reflections of yourself when you were younger. But the point I want to make is that we all have to draw on at least one, hopefully more, professor or a teacher who went the extra mile and made you feel special and who gave a certain trust as being sharing some of your problems, the issues that you might have had as a student aren't that much different today. As professors, we see the students coming to us with problems. I know in my field in fine arts, we actually address all these things as projects in a visual way because it integrates so much of what being an educator is all about. But the point I want to make here is that we must all have some teacher who really went the extra mile for us and moved us to the point where there is a spiritual and moral aspect of being an educator that is not to be taken lightly. Because you impact people for your life. As I think of Arthur Osborne and some of these other great painters and teachers, and it guides me as a teacher, and particularly in a crisis, because I can't think of any time when we're not in some kind of a crisis. So that's the point I just want to make, is that I draw on some of the people that allows me to be a better empathizer with the students, because I had good teachers in college.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, I think if anybody has had those experiences, it's good to draw on. If anybody's mentor, though, had the approach of like tough love, that's often going to be what they pass on. So that's is the part where if somebody said, I was going through a hard time, and someone told me like, hey, like toughen up. And maybe that was what that person needed at the time, that's fantastic. Whether or not it's what the student today is going to respond to, we have to be a little more open to like, okay, what is support going to look like for this person? Like, there are some people for whom tough love is exactly what they needed, and for other people for whom some kind of witnessing, acknowledgement, and encouragement, is necessary. Yes.
So tell me if I'm mischaracterizing what you're saying. But it seems like as a teacher, you've got sort of two roles. One is to teach the subject, right? That itself is an emotional labor. Insofar as you're concerned, this is not about you, right? This is about how you most effectively run a classroom and engage students so they learn the most, right? So
you're managing a learning experience.
You're managing a learning experience, and how that makes you feel is completely irrelevant to how effective you are in managing that learning experience.
Yeah.
Now, there's a second sort of thing, which is managing the emotions, right, of the students. I guess what I'm asking about is how do you see those going together, how do you see them in hierarchy? Is this sort of engaging with students with respect to empathy something done kind of on a one-on-one basis, if someone comes to an office hours and is sharing with me, or if someone is sending me emails talking about personal matters, or not just something in a reflection paper? Are you talking about that this is something that occurs also in the classroom, that you sort of, if it comes up in the classroom?
Sure, it's a good question. It does, do you want to respond to that, or?
I think
I'll have you respond as well.
no, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Please.
Actually, that's a very good organization, but for me, these two are the same. So, that's me, I don't know. It's, like for me, that's what the right to do my job. So I cannot distinguish these two. It's one thing. And maybe sometimes one has a better, more weight, and sometimes the other. But they're one thing for me. I mean, that's the way, otherwise I cannot teach.
They feel the same for you?
They're together.
Yeah. Let me see what I can think about your question. I mean, managing somebody as a learner does feel a little different than manage them as like a fuller human being. In the sense of like, if I'm, it's been a long time since I taught SATs, but when I was teaching math, right, I was basically teaching somebody to be a really good sort of human-powered calculator, right? They need to be a calculator plus with the ability to like juggle tasks while being a calculator. And so that's a much more narrow role that the student team is playing than somebody who has a life outside of the classroom. Right? If I'm managing the fact that they also have a life outside of the classroom, that does feel like a different task. We'll say that to begin with. Pitch it to me again here too, because there's another piece of this that I want to make sure I'm getting, and I'm not like,
All right, I have an hour and 25 minute class session. I can spend the whole class session talking to the students about their feelings. And
I see, here we go, good, okay.
We can workshop, we
Yeah.
can problems and talk about.
What you're asking about is, what if the interaction happens during class time? Yes, because so far, really, everything here, I've been assuming like a private approach.
Okay.
And you're not, and you're really asking about like, what if they approach during class time, which is a really good question. Here's what please, but I actually tell you what, I definitely want to call on people because like there are teachers in the room, so I want to hear from them. I'll tell you what comes to mind for me first. I mean, I think as a teacher, right, if they bring up something personal, in some ways I want to show them that I want to be like responsive to it, and maybe like acknowledge what they're saying and also invite them to like discuss it offline. Be like, this is really important. You know, I might say that like, would it help if we talk about this like outside of class time? So I'm not saying like I don't have time for this now, but I'm saying like, hey, I could really give this some time outside, if that's something you're willing to offer, of course. Or even if it's just like a brief conversation about, hey, counseling is available. Yeah, I think acknowledgement and setting aside time. It might not have to be during class. I know that what some people may feel tempted to do is a kind of like empathizing in the actual class of like, hey, we're all going through this, I've been through it too, like I was a college student once. What's tricky about that is that people, and especially teens, will not believe that you have been through what they've been through, and also they might be correct that you haven't been through what they've been through, right? And that's why empathizing is always better with this, oh, you are feeling this, I'm witnessing you, rather than, oh, believe me, we're all going through it. No, I'm going through it, what it looks like for Matt Lowe to go through it. I'm not going through it the way they are. So yeah, I think acknowledging like that can be helpful, and then trying to like sort of siphon, whatever the metaphor is, for making sure that that they know they're going to be addressed. I mean, if you want to use class time for it, you can. I don't think you have to. Did you want to please?
Well, I'm not a teacher, so I can't say from that perspective, but I'm an advisor for Oxley and for Trio. And so first, y'all are doing an excellent job. We hear from the students' perspective when we are advising them. So you are all doing excellent work. We see it from the perspective of the long hours that you stay or the willingness to respond. I think it's not necessarily about teaching both things in a classroom, and it looks different for everybody, but I think it's also possibly not to change your syllabus or anything like that, but maybe including that in some of the discussions that y'all had, right? So if, in terms of arts, right, you're able to talk about it through that, but maybe it's through some of the books that they're reading or painting a picture that, yes, times are hard and they were once hard before through what you're reading and things like that. And also just being authentic, I think we are all on the same page, which is why we're here, and knowing that us as advisors, we support on that emotional way as well. And so it's not the idea of tossing them over to somebody else, but saying there's so many resources on campus and so many people that are here willing to support you. Here are a few of them, right? And so it's not like just tossing them over, you kind of just alley you and the rest of everybody else slam dunk if it's a reference basketball term. But I think it's that idea of just working together, like the faculty, the Oxley advisor, the counseling center, and then they know that it's not just one thing. So I think that's been helpful, and you are all doing great. And that's what
I think each teacher can really think about like what if, because like in some ways besides this being emotional, it's also topical. And I will let you be the judge. If something topical will really be well integrated with whatever you're teaching. Right? If it feels like, oh, we can make this real, we can, cool, go for it. If it feels like it's going to be forced, don't. Do what feels comfortable to you. If this conversation you're not looking to facilitate, don't put yourself in that role. Yes.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on Josh's initial question, I could see that happening, but there's also an emotional dynamic in the class, and more of a collective dynamic.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be one or two students that might express something and they're speaking for the class, even if they're not speaking for the class. And then you have to figure out a way to respond, not just to them individually, but to the whole class, aware that people are experiencing things differently. But sometimes you have a dynamic in class where there might be a certain level of tension that's emotional and whether or not. And whether it's one or two students, I think that's maybe what I'm interested to know, what your thought is on that kind of a
Sure. What comes to mind again for me is, I think the part, so if we can almost go back to the first slide where the emotional concern has this like business end to it. I don't know, if I were a teacher, I would want to have that discussion. Having it as a full class discussion sounds like a power struggle. Right? And so that's the tricky part here, right? If there's a conversation about witnessing what people are going through, that can feel safe. If it becomes a policy thing, I mean, actually, I feel bad that I'm going to punt on this a little bit because it's about policy and a power struggle. This sounds like a kind of classroom management that, for what it's worth, is one of the reasons I'm a therapist and not a teacher anymore. How are you going to, with the class, do this kind of acknowledging while enforcing policy? Or I think what I've named, at least, is the kind of sending out the message of, here are these two things. When there's pushback, yeah, I feel very stumped in some way, because I keep going back to, like, yes, here's what, I mean, look, at some point, what becomes tricky about this is whether or not you're sitting there being like, oh, maybe I should change the policy, right? And then, I don't know, I think maybe you talk to your department head, you say, hey, like, here's what the pushback I'm getting, you know, maybe I want to be responsive to that pushback, and then it actually is a policy thing, which, I mean, look, nothing solves, when there's a problem causing stress, nothing solves the stress like solving the problem. That's never my role, right? My role is also solving the stress, it's just dealing with the stress. Yeah, I hope it's okay to do something with it, because it's a fair point of like, if they are having feelings and what they're trying to do is use them to have power over you, that is no longer simply about like acknowledgement. We've moved into a different realm, and it is a realm of power. I recommend talking to a department head. Yeah, feel free to let me know. I can't tell, like, it's sort of like you hit the limits of my field, I think, with that one. Yes.
I guess I would just say one thing. We're talking about the students, but we're going to have to divide incoming first-year students. What John said, have not been in a classroom for a year and a half, 10% of their lives in the pandemic. I think they're like a different category, whereas like upper class, like majors or whatever, we can do it them separately. But I'm just really thinking about this and Josh's question in terms of incoming first-year students and how we may have to give a lot more time to them in class to process stuff because they haven't been in a classroom for so long.
That's very possible. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the return to the room is something that will require some rituals. Pass back over to you. I'm happy to, you know, you can email me, Matthew.low, you can email counseling, etc.
Yes. Okay, so let's take about a 90-second break. And Gabrielle and Fern are going to come out. So we're going to break a drink, and then we will hear about all the policies.
That's pretty deep. Checking all the emails that I got here. Around as of now, but I know they
we're in the position where we have to excuse absences, right? We've never excused absences, but we all felt like we needed to excuse absences so that we didn't have sick students coming to campus. Well, as you know, that's opened just a hornet's nest as we try to navigate and manage how we balance student health, community health, student needs with academic integrity and attendance policies and managing absences. And no one knows this better than you because you were on the front lines last semester dealing with all of student inquiries, emails, I'll say complaints, requests, demands at some times. And so I really, working with you, we put together these policies, but we would like any feedback, any scenarios, any stories that you want to talk about of how you handle things. So working, as I said, with faculty, we decided that this semester, if students want to be excused only for COVID, they need to submit a positive test to stewscreen.com. And I feel kind of ashamed because when Matthew was talking before about feelings when students are emailing you, how do you feel? Sometimes I felt on Friday morning when 10 students reported they had sniffles and they couldn't possibly take Dr. Kampaya's midterm, I felt suspicious. So, I feel like, we want to support students, but students are students. And as you're all pointing out, they're not used to being in the classroom. So this semester, we're going to ask for proof of positive tests. That should not be difficult. A student will submit those tests to stewscreen.com. stewscreen@mattstevens.edu, something like that. And then Oxley will inform you that the student has submitted documentation of a positive test. Now, Frank.
Well, I hate to interrupt you, but...
No, please do.
But in addition to that, a lot of times is, I have to take care of my parents. So is that part of this type of...
I have to say, Frank, I don't think so. I don't think any more than it would have been before COVID.
I agree.
That's right.
And that's why it's so complicated, and that's why, there's a struggle. And when you say that, of course, we feel empathy, understanding, and, I'll get to that later, that absence is still absent. And David Aliano worked with me and you on language for the syllabus. Manage your absences. You just can't miss too much class for any reason without having to possibly withdraw from the class or take a leave of absence. And last semester, I know there was a lot of confusion and students' behavior wasn't always the best. Some of you just like to, if a student provides documentation that they're positive and need to quarantine for 10 days. I know Frank, you like to just stream them in to class. That's your preferred method, and that's wonderful. But for some of you, Leonard, I don't know if that's something you do. It is. I'm thinking about Mariella Long. She's not here today. She does not want to do that. She doesn't want to, and that's fine. We just ask you to support that student through that period of absence without marking them absent. And penalizing them for their absences, but you do it any way you want. You're not obligated. Did you experience that last semester where students were saying, oh, so-and-so is letting me stream in, and you're not? And a lot of it, I thought, yeah, Matthew, and it makes people uncomfortable. You have to remember, your absence policies are your absence policies. So if they don't submit a positive test, you're under no obligation to support them. And even when they do, it's up to you how you support them. So that's how we're going to deal with students who submit positive test results. Yes?
Why students are waiting for the test result? Let's say it's going to take 3 days, and what are the...
That's great. That's a great question. I don't know if we have the best answer for that.
What was the question? I couldn't hear.
What happens in the period of time between the time they take the test and they get the results? I've been thinking about that all morning, actually, Sunny. So let me talk about the more complicated scenario where a student wakes up, sore throat, headache, I think I might have COVID. If that's genuinely true, we don't want that student coming to campus. So we're going to ask them if they want to be excused and supported by you officially. We're going to ask them to submit proof that they took a test within 24 hours. I think it'll help a little, just because they'll have to have a little skin in the game and go, and I'm going to ask them to get the really high one up in the nasal swab, so they have to do something to get excused from class. I don't think it addresses your concerns. Also, that really should not happen to students more than a few times a semester. It shouldn't happen, not at all, but maybe once. So you're talking about a student missing, what, 2 days, 3 days of classes, depending on how long the test results come back. It should not be an issue if students are being honest about their symptoms and managing their absences. I worry about that too. So far, it seems like local test results, and you guys can speak to this as well. I think they're coming back, in my experience, within 24 to 48 hours. If things heat up, that could change, right? It could be longer, and I don't have to deal with that. But I just want proof that at least they took the initiative to take the test if they're really concerned that they might have COVID-19.
What's happening with vaccinations of students coming in? Because this might be one of our issues.
Yes. You guys want to talk about that? Well, I was just going to say before that, if you have a student that says, I can't get a test, we know that's not true. Okay, so student affairs, if you head to student affairs, see Tracy Harris, she will find the right person. We will Uber them there. We will drive them there. We will get them there in any way possible. We have good relations with St. Joseph's Hospital and with our local urgent care next to Scott.
What email should we tell them if they say they can get a test?
Stu Screen. Just use Stu Screen for everything. Spur and I will be overseeing that.
The vaccinations, we have about 950 students right now, as of last I checked. 950, and 950 that are, but that's student-wise, just students.
How many students are registered? So I'm trying to get a percentage. How many students?
It's around 60%. 60%.
So at what, and the goal is by October 15th, to get that 100% of our students vaccinated?
Yes.
Okay. And is it a matter, do you think that the remaining 40% are just not uploading their data, or do you think it's like, well, I'm going to kind of try to get away with it?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. The numbers are going up. You know, we're doing these incentives for the students. Every time we have an incentive coming up, the numbers skyrocket, right? Because they want the prizes, which is good. We're outreaching to students that have not been vaccinated. They did that survey that indicated, do you intend on doing it? Are you not? Do you have religious medical exemptions? And we're trying to follow up with students that on our records that don't have any vaccination or come to us and say they've only done one. So the numbers are going up. We're holding clinics. We're doing another clinic this week. It's Friday. We're likely going to hold another clinic after classes start. We're doing testing the first 3 weeks of the semester. Our first one is today, and over the next 3 weeks, the 9th, 15th, and 21st, we're doing testing on campus.
So what about the freshman class coming in? What percentage of, they all knew that to be here they had to have the vaccine?
Yeah, I don't have the raw data of breakdown by class. I can look into that and see what the freshman class is. Which is why we're doing a vaccine clinic also the day after movement day. So they're going to be here moving in to the residence halls on Thursday. We're doing a clinic on Friday.
And students who are not vaccinated are required to submit PCR before they return, and they're also going to be required to do weekly testing. Well, we have a pool testing here. And everyone's welcome to do the pool testing, which is for the unvaccinated, and they're required to do it up until that October 15th.
So, I hate to be hanging on to this, but I have an objective, which is to get rid of GB math. But at what point do we think we can be somewhat free of operating quote normal mode again? At what percentage?
President Burns is here.
Right moment.
Yes, you should. President Burns is here, and she has made clear that once we get 80% as a campus community, she will take off the mask mandate in public spaces.
So where are we now as a community? 60%, we're all vaccinated.
Yeah.
All of the administrators are
We'll have to do
vaccinated.
some mathematical statistical analysis.
I'm happy to work for now.
And
I love numbers, I can tell you.
there was a question last time I met with faculty about medical and religious exemptions for students. Correct me if I'm wrong, at this point only 4 students have been given a medical or religious exemption. So people have asked me what happens on October 15th if a student has not submitted vaccination records or gotten approved on medical or religious exemption. They will be, just like they are normally if they have not complied with mandatory vaccinations, they will be interim suspended and not be allowed to be on campus, attend classes. You will not need to excuse their absence. You should not let them stream in if that's okay. And their absence and they might have to withdraw from the semester. By October
Which is
15th.
what we do for the immunizations now.
James?
I thought President Burns suggested that there would be rather cryptic, some exceptions for religious or medical exceptions, which I found a little contradictory or baffling. I mean, there should be no exceptions, but evidently, I don't know what a religious exception would even look like.
Well, we do have some religious exemptions that were exempted even before COVID. We have some students who are from religious backgrounds where they've been given religious exemption. There are very few, maybe 2 or 3, because of the religious identification that they came into the college indicating.
But they would still pose a very serious threat to the rest of the campus, so there's a contradiction there. I'm not sure how that would be resolved outside of being more strict.
I think that's why we need to focus just with any immunization. You know, there's always people who won't be able to get them because of their religious backgrounds, because I think we have a few students who are actually, very few, maybe 2 or 3, allergic to components in the vaccine, so they cannot be vaccinated. That is some people.
That's different from a religious.
Yes, but there are genuine religious exemptions. President Burns wants to.
I just want to add, thank you. This team is fantastic. You all are fantastic. This experience of the pandemic has blown everyone's minds, and the conversations we have to have are just unexpected and necessary. Students who have exemptions, again, we're talking about a very small number of students and employees who have exemptions, are still required to wear masks and still required to do weekly testing. And so we are trying our hardest to keep the community safe. And I would also say that there are many people we know who are vaccinated who have not uploaded their records. Ask your friends on campus if they've uploaded their records, because we know our percentage is higher than what we have as documented evidence at this point. So please encourage. And I sat with students last night at our student leaders dinner, and the students said, so what happens October 16th? And I explained to them there's interim suspension. And they were surprised. These are student leaders, they were surprised, and they said, is that real? Of course it is. And I said, I would happily walk around and help find students who haven't submitted their information on October 16th. I know that's what's happening. But I'm happy to be a part of that as well, because we're really seriously committed to the health and safety of this community. But if we can hit that 80% before then, hallelujah, and we'll lift the master date. But health and safety is absolutely a priority. And we do have to acknowledge there are certain religions that do exempt them from vaccinations broadly. Not many. If a student or employee says, I'm Catholic and I don't believe in the vaccination, well, the Pope says be vaccinated. so they're being reviewed very carefully. Sorry, thank you.
No, thank you.
The numbers that we have, does it include the grade students? There might be a reason why the vaccination rate is so low, because obviously they are part-time students, they are not feel obligated to upload our vaccine records, for instance. So maybe we can look into that. Many of them are not coming to campus physically, so the graduate students.
Yes, so they'll be excluded from our count when we think about percentage of campus community.
We're going to transfer at 80% now, and we just don't know.
Well, perhaps. We might not know it because some people didn't submit records. So it's very possible that 80% of the campus community has been vaccinated, but until 80% of people upload their records, we can't
So the
declare
business
that.
department offers to do the numbers.
It's okay, we'll put it numbers.
Brittany?
So, I know that students often ask, well, how do I know if they received my vaccination proof? And I know the response is they stopped receiving the survey.
Yes.
So, but if they want to hear it, yes, we have your card, so they just email Stu Screen and somebody will correct them.
They've been, and I've been checking. I do it daily. Yeah, they both email Sue Screen, and then I can verify if they, and so, it's a good thing that they do email, and it's okay if they do, because I found some that uploaded, and it was only the first dose. And they didn't upload their second dose until later on after we noticed it was their first dose, basically. So it's okay to email. Stu Screen at Mount St. Vincent, when in doubt, just push that email. One of us will respond.
It's us.
It is us. One of us will respond. She's dealing with the academic side. I'm dealing with the quarantine side. If they live on campus and they're going into quarantine, when they're permitted to come back to campus, submitting their negative result to come back to campus. So when in doubt, if they have a question, if you have a question, you can email us directly, yes, but that two-screen email is critical because we keep files too for all these students, so we can refer back to the communication.
Faculty have asked me also, you submit your records and you don't get any kind of confirmation. It goes through, so don't worry about that. If I haven't, you know if you haven't submitted your records, I've contacted you. And faculty, obviously, compliance has been excellent, so. Questions? Comments? John?
Do students need to have both doses lined up?
Yes?
Yes, totally that's.
Yes. And employees, the deadline is September 7th. So.
Yes, Carol. For the positive tests, PCR rapid, both, right? We're gonna.
PCR.
Okay, excellent.
If they sit now, some may submit like an initial rapid, and we tell them, yeah, we'll take it, but then I've been telling students even the past couple weeks, they'll get another PCR just to be sure.
Thank you.
And then firm students will have to submit a negative test or medical note to return after
Yes.
isolation.
Yes, after the 7, I believe it's 7 days, on day 7 of the 10-day quarantine period for CDC.
They can get tested again. If they're negative, they can come back. David?
I know I came up with a few students about the negative testing that the CDC now says some people could test positive up to 90 days. So what do you do in that? Because I did have an advisee that said that they're missing a whole semester and I'm recovered.
This we don't have a solution for, to be honest. We've tried to come up with one, but we looked into antigen testing. All of us in this room are going to get our degree in public health, right? After this, we looked into antigen testing. There are some people who just keep testing positive. At the beginning, we had doctors willing to write notes saying the student's testing positive, is asymptomatic, can return. Second semester, they were not willing to do that. So David, I think we're going to have to take these students on a case-by-case basis. And, when Matthew was talking before, I was thinking, and I referred to before, sometimes the student's just going to have to take a medical leave. As awful as that is, if they can't come to class for most of the semester, I know we like to work with them, we try to be supportive, but if they really miss too much class, they're going to have to withdraw.
And just to follow up, because I know the CDC sometimes is saying different things. If you're vaccinated and then test positive, as opposed to unvaccinated and positive, so is there any different rules about that?
It's, from my understanding, because we dealt with this last week, if they're not vaccinated and they have symptoms, they need to go get tested and they need to go into quarantine, just like normal, just like it was normally before. Last year. If they're fully vaccinated and they have symptoms, they don't need to quarantine. It's if they test positive, they need to go into the quarantine and then test again on the 7th day and submit a negative test.
So it's still, it's the same, so it's the same?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah, and we're going to keep contact tracing. So we'll let people know if they've been near someone who tested positive. We'll advise them if they're vaccinated to get tested. And if they're unvaccinated, they will need to quarantine, and we are not supporting those students with excused absences. If they're not vaccinated, they need to get vaccinated. Josh?
If a professor ends up getting Delta, they end up breaking through, should classes be held online while they're in quarantine?
It depends on how you feel, frankly. If anyone, unfortunately gets COVID, I know foreign languages had this problem really badly last March. Some people are test positive or asymptomatic. If you feel like you can teach remotely, feel free. If you feel like you can't, don't, right? And you'll work with chairs on providing coverage or alternative assignments, or maybe a colleague can fill in, but it really depends on how sick the person is.
During student orientation, are you going to review with the students, kind of here's the rules you have to follow, if you're positive, you tested before?
Yes, And those of you teaching, I'm looking at David Gallup, those of you teaching FYE will be on the forefront of this for our incoming students, yes. But student affairs will be reviewing everything with students during the weekend, and I urge you to take a few minutes on the first day of class just to go over your own policies as well as the college's standard policies.
Can I just stress with synthesizing, going back to synthesizing with students, because I often hear from students, I don't know how to go get tested, where to go get tested, it's wasting my mom's house is really unreliable. Send them to us. We have an incredible relationship with City MD on 238, and then AFC Urgent Care down on Broadway. And then all else fails there, we have a great relationship with St. Joseph's Hospital. I called the COO for them, I really need a student to get tested today, and they work with us, and we've done them to get tested. So when in doubt, email me, email students, we refer them to us, we'll get them, we'll shuttle them, we'll Uber them, whatever it is. We had to shuttle the entire women's lacrosse team last year to go get tested. We did. We took 2 great bands and Keon, Residence Life, and myself, we shuttled them all down to AFC, we got the whole team tested. So we'll do it, but it's important. So don't ever, if they come to you confused, lost, scared, whatever, we can go get them their test.
Yeah, and not just for the testing. I know Sister mentioned before, students come to her talking about homelessness or financial stress, something you mentioned. Send them to us because we can help them file a financial aid appeal. We can connect them to resources. It should just, please feel free to use us to help connect students to resources, not just COVID related or stemming from COVID as well. But you guys are the ones on the front line, so if you think these policies aren't working or you have ideas about other things, we can keep these moving forward with your input. We're not going to know what the semester is going to be like until we're there. And I know as John started out, we talked about, we thought we'd be way more back to normal by this semester. I don't know what to expect. You know me, I'm an optimist. I think we'll have a really good vaccination rate and things will be better. So I do really truly believe that. Leonard and I were talking about it during the break. Anything else we're not thinking of or you want clarification on or?
Will the classrooms be sanitized as they were a year ago, or do we take it upon our initiative to clean our classrooms, or sometimes the students clean?
They'll be cleaned.
I thought the staff, the maintenance staff might see.
They'll be cleaned as usual, deep cleaned, and we'll keep having hand sanitizer dispensers all over campus and wipes. I think though, and as all of us, again, become experts in public health, I think that the things we thought last year at this time weren't necessarily true. I was not a wipe down my groceries person, but I know a lot of my friends were. The risk from, looking at my natural science colleagues, the risk from fomite transmission, I don't know if I'm saying that right, because I'm a total amateur, it's really, really low. So it's really about masking. It's about vaccination and masking. Even now, I don't think we did social distancing, obviously we worked really hard. 6 feet apart, it's not particularly effective. It's the mask and the vaccines that will get us through this past.
And opening windows.
Ventilation, absolutely, Sarah.
Actually, a social distancing question. Last year, I kind of worked hard to not put students in groups, which was so frustrating. Does that seem, in terms of policy, et cetera, okay to divide students up, you guys go over here, pretend together?
I really do think it's fine. I think they're certainly interacting their way outside of the classroom, so I think as we increase vaccination rates and if they can still wear their masks, I think that's fine. I want to say though, we've learned some things from the pandemic. Remote office hours, I think, are a really helpful idea. Keep those if they work for you. Some of you feel comfortable in your offices and you can socially distance to your comfort. If you can't, I think really virtual remote office hours worked wonderfully. We're going to be continuing those in the Academic Resource Center for tutoring and Oxley as well. That sometimes students can communicate with you more easily remotely given their schedules and their family pressure. So that's up to you if you want to keep remote office hours as long as you're accessible to students. I think it could be really beneficial.
Which Oxley is now in the renovated library in the second floor, so come visit. Yes, it's beautiful.
Want to talk about that? Yeah, so we have a new student center.
Yeah, Oxley, second floor of the library, all our offices up there. We're all on floor together. It's beautiful, everything's renovated, all glass. We have an area for a whole room for tutoring. The classroom on the second floor is all renovated, as well as our offices. It looks beautiful. Come on up and visit. And then lounge furniture, our students have been asking for more study space. There's these giant cubes that hold 4 to 6 students at a table that they can study in, and so we're really excited. And everyone's been coming by, so we love it. So come on.
And we're hoping it becomes like a hangout space for students and it connects all of our support services in one place, so I think it'll really take off.
I'm a little uncomfortable asking this, but I will. Do we have access to our students' vaccinations?
You do not. And I know Stephanie brought this up at our last meeting. I've looked into the issue and, it's a slippery, tricky slope, and I mixed metaphors there. Josh?
Would it be possible in sort of finding out what we need to know, but skirting the legal problems of that to do it together where if 100% of the students in your class are vaccinated?
What would it, I guess my question is, I kind of as you said, could you get information on whether 100% are vaccinated? Would it matter? Would it change?
Yeah.
It would?
Yeah.
And what if it were no?
It's more like much more cautious about how you approach it.
But remember, after October 15th.
So that's October 16th is date where we're saying at that point.
We can, I mean, it would, President Burns, you have an opinion? Yeah, it does sound like a big Excel project.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I absolutely understand and appreciate it. And at the same time, I'm very hesitant because it is medical information and it is a little bit of a slippery slope. And so I think, again, focusing on the communication of getting records submitted to students, to make sure you're getting records submitted. And the other thing I was thinking about as well is that we may have students and colleagues who continue to mask post October 15th. Let's say, again, we'll hit 80% before then. And we just need to be mindful of that. Not you all judging those who choose to continue to mask, but the assumptions that are made about people continuing to mask as well. And so navigating those feelings as well. And so I just am hesitant. My gut reaction, I would say. Not that we can't continue that conversation.
No, definitely. And we'll keep the community updated about percentages of student vaccinations and community vaccinations. Stephanie?
I don't understand really what the hesitancy is. I mean, I understand a little bit of it, but to get into a restaurant or when you get to do anything now, you have to just show some stranger your vaccination record. And you have to do that here to keep them right in the dining hall and the gym. So to me, it's just an extension of another, you already have the information and it's going to be made public in certain areas. Why not in one of the areas that they're all spending a lot of time?
Yeah, it's interesting. We somewhat laugh about this, not that it's funny at all, but the dining hall fitness center, Peter J. Sharp, we are working on a tap-in system where your IDs will allow you to enter indicating your vaccination status because we have to have people at the front managing that information. We don't for classrooms. New York City does not require an indication of class because you're not entertaining. That's what it boils down to. If you're not an entertaining venue, indoor entertainment, it's hilarious, right? No, so by the policies required of New York City, we're not required to. And so students can say, well, I understand at the dining hall you have to check, but you can't make me in the classroom because that's not required by the city. So it is my hesitation. Like I said, I completely understand it. But my hesitation is we would be imposing that, not, for example, the city imposing that, or the CDC, or so forth. And so, again, we can continue to have the conversation, but my quick gut reaction is a hesitation.
So my cynical mind says, I'll just hold classes in the cafeteria.
logic is, again, in classrooms, again, the likelihood of being closer together. Now that again, social distancing is not required in classroom. We cannot impose logic where there is none, really. So,
Anything else? You know, if you have any questions, need any support, reach out to any one of us this semester and we'll take the problem off your hands and get you through it and kind of intervene in a way that makes your life easier. And as I said, please send us any feedback, suggestions throughout the semester. And thank you for returning again, you know, full of energy and desire to serve our students in person in seat. And that's really admirable, and it speaks to the mission of the college and the way you carry that mission to serve our students so well. So thank you.